So my name is Dr. Kylie Bakovernick. I'm gonna be talking today about supporting our students in a time of crisis. Um, my plan for today is to talk for probably about 30 minutes, and then I will open for questions, and I plan to stay on as long as we have questions. Um, so if you can send any questions that you already know you have straight in the chat box, or if any questions come up while I'm talking, feel free to send them in the chat box as well. And Bezrat Hashem, I will get to everything. Just getting up my slides. Great. So we're talking about supporting our students in times of crisis. My name is Dr. Kylie Bakovernick. Just to give context, I'm not giving this as somebody affiliated with a particular program. I don't have any particular goal in giving this talk other than trying to fill a need, hopefully. If there's a need, I'm hoping to fill it. I'm sure I won't cover everything, and I'm also pretty sure I will offend somebody by leaving something out or saying something a certain way. So please help me out with that by using the Q&A. And by the way, I will say the same thing in terms of students, encouraging questions and being open and receptive to questions leads to a decrease in all kinds of problems. So he's following the same plan there. Anything else I should say about myself? That I didn't say. Yeah, I'm founder and director at the CBT DBT Center. We're a group psychotherapy practice specializing in evidence-based treatments from community. We have an office in Yerushalayim, and we also see clients in America. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. So it's hard to know exactly what will be useful to people. So a lot of this is my own guesses and my own what I've been hearing from mechanchim and mechanchos over the past close to a week. Uh, and so I'm hoping I'm addressing things that are useful and relevant. And again, please interrupt me, or rather than send questions in the chat box to address that if I'm not hitting something. So just a little bit of background information to start with about suicide. So just to explain what suicide is, I think is helpful. It's typically a long-term solution to a short-term problem. I am in high emotional pain or distress right now, and this is a solution to that problem of being in emotional pain. I'll make a joke sometimes with people that, it's not a very good solution. We don't actually know that it's going to solve the problem. But aside from that, it is actually a long-term solution to a short-term problem. And so there's two parts to that. It's intended to solve a problem that doesn't seem to have an apparent solution. And because of the problem is the high level emotional pain, that problem solving process is ineffective because I'm not able to really effectively engage in problem solving when my emotional pain is so high. So if a person can bring down that emotional pain temporarily, like in the moment of emotional crisis, then their problem solving abilities come back online and they're able to actually engage in an effective solution generation in order to solve their problem of emotional pain, as opposed to engaging in this long-term not great solution. But if they're not able to bring down their emotional pain, then they're kind of stuck with this problem that they don't have a solution to. I don't want to differentiate between what we call passive and active suicidality. Many people struggle with passive suicidality for even like significant chunks of their life without ever having a real problem with that. And what I'll typically say when people, I'll ask very often when I meet with anybody, I'll ask if they ever think about ending their lives or if they ever think about not wanting to be here. And very often people will say to me, yeah, when I'm really, really upset, I just wish I could not exist. So that is a very normal mental process, right? If I'm in pain, I want that pain to stop. I often explain it like if your hand is on the burner, what's the normal response is to take your hand off. That's not a complicated, that's not like no one would think that person is crazy for doing that. That's a very normal response. When you're in high levels of emotional pain, you will do whatever you possibly can to make that emotional pain stop. That's very logical, normal, reasonable. And there's a difference between that passive, I don't want to be here, I want this pain to stop, and even I wish I would die, to active suicidality. Active suicidality is that I have an actual intent to die. So as opposed to a wish or kind of like it's a there, but it's not something I'm actively pursuing. Now I'm actively pursuing it. I have intent to complete it. Maybe I have a plan of how I would complete it, and maybe I have means by which to complete it. So those would be major concerns if there is active suicidality. Passive suicidality, I would bet that there's a very significant percentage of all your students who are walking around with passive suicidal ideation on a daily basis and will continue to do so. Hopefully not for very long, but it's very reasonable that will happen. That is a very reasonable thing, and I would not be shocked by any stretch of the imagination if that were to be true. But that's very different than active suicidality, which is concerning. I mean, both are concerning and both we want to be dealing with, but there's a big difference in terms of my level of concern for somebody who has passive suicidal ideation versus active suicidal ideation. If there is active suicidal ideation, yeah, I want to be on the grounds dealing with that urgently. And if there's passive suicidal ideation, I actually don't want to be getting too hysterical. And many therapists will get pretty upset even by passive suicidal ideation, which is unfortunate because it makes it more of a problem than it needs to be, and it's not really leading to dealing with it, because the more reactive we get, the more that this bad solution becomes an actually effective solution. Let me explain what I mean by that. The more that passive suicidal ideation works to regulate my emotions, the more that it works to regulate my emotions, and therefore I'm going to continue to use it. That's, again, very reasonable. You don't have to be crazy to do that. That's a very reasonable process. If when I think about suicide, I feel better, then I'm going to keep doing that. And if when I think about suicide and tell my therapist or tell my mentor or tell my friend, and then they immediately soothe me or validate me or give me additional support, then and I feel better then the most reasonable, normal thing is to continue to have passive suicidal ideation. So what we actually want to do is to make passive suicidal ideation not work to reduce emotional distress. One of the many ways we do that is by not getting hysterical about it. The more hysterical I get about it, the more of a deal I make out of it, the more that it works to solve the problem that they're trying to solve. I want to make it not a great solution. I want to make other things really great solutions, right? Like actually being skillful and effective, not passive suicidal ideation. So if a student is communicating passive suicidal ideation, you definitely want them speaking with somebody who's a professional in this area, but you also don't want to get hysterical about it. And you also don't want to increase your attention or your support or your time with that student, because that is not, that's making the suicidality work. We don't want it to work. We want it to actually just be displayed as it is, as a very ineffective solution. The term death by suicide, because as a community, this is not something we're generally talking about. I don't think this comes up very often. But the term commit suicide is what people are usually familiar with. But talking about suicide as committing suicide, it just doesn't sound good. It doesn't read well. It sounds like committing a crime. It sounds like a sin or a moral failing. Okay, obviously, we could say other terms, but those are the terms that the secular world talks about: moral failing, sin. So it makes it harder to talk about. Death by suicide communicates that there's an illness side of that, and we are poskening that way, so we might as well talk that way. We're assuming that anybody who dies by suicide in our generation is doing so out of a serious mental illness and nothing else, and so we want to communicate that aspect of it. And I think that's important in terms of allowing for communication of it, which is important. We want there to be communication about it. Does therapy work? Very often it does. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't. And I also want to be honest that therapists are not fantastic at predicting suicide. So many people have asked me in the last week, what are the warning signs? What did we miss? What were the red flags? Not necessarily were there any, which I think is part of what makes this so hard. But not necessarily were there any. Very often therapy helps, but we're not fantastic at predicting suicide, which is very heavy thing to sit with, but it's also a little bit freeing in a way because it enables you to do the effective thing without worrying that like, oh no, I need to do the proper thing, because there are a few core things, yes, that are important, but many things that are not clear and not important. So that's just, I think, important to be aware of, that a lot of what people talk about is like warning signs, like I don't even know, like people say hopelessness is this a warning sign. Come on, everybody feels hopeless every, once in a while, like is this ever going to get better? I don't know. That's a very normal thought process to have. That has nothing to do with your risk of suicide. That's just kind of ridiculous. So there are many, I'll talk about some warning signs, but it's not like a very, we're not so good at this. We're not so good at this. We have a few things, but we're not so good at this. Does therapy work though? Very often it does. Therapy is very good. We're psychological science. I'm not going to say therapy because that's, I think I'm giving too much credit to therapists then. I like to give so much credit to therapists, but where psychological science is at is good. And we can treat many mental health problems. Anxiety is super treatable. OCD is super treatable. Panic attacks are so treatable. Depression is so treatable. And suicidality is also extremely treatable. Suicide is typically seen under either depression or borderline personality disorder. Could be other things, but that's like the general, most common. And both of those are extremely treatable. Both depression and borderline personality disorder are extremely treatable. I want to be very clear about that. That doesn't mean that every therapist is using treatments that are effective or that every therapist is effective, but that does mean that we have treatments available that work. And I want to be just clear about where we are as a field of psychological science. Owning that there's always a research to practice gap. That's always a thing. Okay, so warning signs. So I said already, bottom line is we're not so great at predicting suicide. We're just not fantastic at it. But there are possible signs: giving away possessions, talking about suicide, obtaining means, social withdrawal. Those are more typical for depression, which is more like when somebody's depressed for a long time and they start planning suicide, that's more of like a meditated, thought out thing. But very often people are not so methodical and meticulous in suicide. Very often it's really more impulsive and coming from that severe emotional pain in the moment. So there might be, hours before a really wonderful time, and I might be feeling great, but in that moment I'm feeling so terrible. Which is why it's good to work with people, and this is coming more from a therapist perspective, not necessarily I would expect mechanchim or mechanchos to be responsible for this, but that's why it's important to deal with what do we do when we're going to hit those very, very intense moments. What do we do about those moments? So those are important. Changes in sleep and eating patterns, searching for or discussing means, increased substance use. I'm not assuming the list is super comprehensive or helpful, but just I know that this question keeps coming up, so I wanted to address it a little bit. I know the other question that's coming up is copycat suicide. Is that something we should be concerned about? I actually actually researched this area extensively when I was in grad school. And it is true, there is an increase in suicides in general when there is a suicide, but it's much, much, much more likely after a highly publicized and highly sensationalized suicide. There's actually guidelines for media, for press on how to cover suicide at this point, because we know that it's so problematic. The way that it's covered is so problematic. So I do think that we're really at an advantage being in the Haredi community. We're likely not going to highly publicize details of this, and we're also likely not going to sensationalize it as like a wonderful thing, or as like, wow, what an amazing. And any sensationalizing of suicide or highly publicizing details of suicide are much more likely to lead to a copycat. Okay, but bottom line is we're not fantastic at predicting, and we have to sit with that, which I think is a lot of what I've been seeing girls sitting with over the last week is is this going to happen to me? Now, this is not something that's going to happen to you. It doesn't just happen, right? There are many things that lead to this. It's not like suddenly one day you just wake up and kill yourself. And I think we have to sit with that this could happen to a girl just like me, which is, I think, very, very scary thing. We really are desperate to other this, to make this like, okay, well, she was, but it's not true. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, that is absolutely not true. And so sitting with that just like me element is, I think, what is highly stressing out our students. And we do have to encourage sitting with it. When we other it, then it actually makes it that we can't then deal with it if we are dealing with it. So we have to sit with is that, yes, this is a potential. This has now been put on the table that this is a potential. It was there before, but now we're just having it in our face that this is a potential, and we have to sit with that. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It's extremely unlikely it's going to happen. And we have to sit with that just like me aspect. I think is really important. Okay, hopefully okay, now we're moving away from like the information about suicide. Hopefully I'm going to give you some useful tips now. So how do emotions work? Just a general overview of our emotion system. It's really important to give space and allow emotions. Emotions are real, they are whatever they are, and they need to be felt, particularly in relation to grieving this experience. There is grief to be felt. And so we need, and there's probably also many other emotions as well, such as anxiety or guilt are I think the primary ones that I'm hearing about, but I'm sure many, many others as well. Giving space for emotions allows them to do their job, which is to communicate to us, communicate to others, motivate us for action. Emotions do three things. They communicate to us, they communicate to others, and they motivate us for action. And so allow emotions to do those things by experiencing them, and at the same time move to ordinary daily life. There's got to be actually really a balance of both. So we're not just moving on and ignoring it, but we're also not sitting and wallowing in emotions. We've got to have both. So we need to have the time and space that we're giving to experiencing emotions, but we also need to like experience daily life. So having regular class is really valuable, but if a student says not up for this one, that would be totally, in my opinion, very helpful and healthy. Like, just say, I'm not there right now. I just can't do this right now. But don't skip out on the full week of classes. Don't stay in your room for a whole day. That's not helpful. Because and moving on to ordinary daily life gives our emotion system that, instead of experiencing an overload, it gives us a break. It's also, I like to just think about emotion vitamins and introduce that concept. Emotion vitamins, I really would love students to learn this at the beginning of the year, every year. But the idea of emotion vitamins is to build our emotional immune system. So to build up or decrease our vulnerability to emotional crashes. We can fuel our emotional immune system by taking care of our physical. And I really recommend this right now. If there are students who are struggling with sleep, that is the most logical and obvious and duh thing, and because you're in shock, and that makes sense. And promoting some rest time. Don't stay up the whole night talking to somebody, right? Lay in bed for 3 hours with the lights off and your shoes off. Those are some basics that I've been seeing. Some just get, with all those factors, rest and support yourself in that you are giving yourself rest. Okay, I'm frustrated, I'm not falling asleep. Fine, I'm giving myself some rest. My brain needs rest, and I'm giving myself some rest. I have no appetite. Totally fine. Eat something. One spoonful, one cracker, eat something. Take a walk, get some sunshine, get some fresh air, something. And then these four things are just valuable in terms of maintaining our emotional immunity on a daily basis, and they give other emotional input for us. So because if we're only attending to this, then yeah, it's going to take up a lot. We have to attend to this. We can't ignore that this is the reality that we're dealing with right now, and we need to attend to other things also. So things that are helpful in terms of taking emotion vitamins are on a daily basis, and intentionally. We want to engage in relationships, connect with people, socialize on some level. We want to do things that are aligned with our values. We want to do things that give us a sense of accomplishment. And we want to do things that give us a sense of pleasure. Now, most of us do these things daily without thinking about it, and that's wonderful. And at a time where we're more emotionally vulnerable, there's a good chance we're going to slide off of this, and then we're going to be even more vulnerable. So just like if I didn't sleep for the last 3 nights, yeah, I'm going to be very vulnerable to losing it, right? So just if I don't do any of these things, I'm more emotionally vulnerable. So these are things that you can support in your students in a very basic and concrete way that really make a difference. What's really important right now for that you can provide your students with is the accurate expression, validating response cycle, which means we want people who are, and by the way, this is not just for your students, this is actually for yourselves as well. This is really for anybody who's having any kind of emotion associated to this, which probably is most people in the yeshivish world, I would guess, to some extent. So anybody who is having any kind of, has to have some version of this where you experience your emotion. This is the second bullet. Healthy grieving allows feeling an emotion, accurately expressing that emotion. So you maybe say out loud to a person, hey, I'm feeling really sad. I'm feeling really down. I'm really upset about this. Or it doesn't have to be to another person. You can say it out. You can just say it to yourself or acknowledge it to yourself. You can also write about it or draw about it or paint about it or sing about it. But any way of getting it out of your just inside of you and expressing it out into the world. So experience the emotion, express the emotion accurately. So inaccurate emotion would be, this is terrible. This is the worst thing ever. I can't handle this. That's not accurate expression. Accurate expression is I'm feeling this thing. 3 is then soothing of that emotion. Like I can cry, or I can, take care of myself. I can give myself space. And then self and or other validation. So I can either tell myself, of course, I'm feeling this way. This is so intense. This is so hard. Or somebody else can tell me, wow, you're going through so much. This is so hard. This is so big. Of course you feel that way. And then moving on to other things. So this process could take an hour, but this doesn't shouldn't be a week. But this process, and it can happen several times within a week. That would make sense, but it can't be all the time. If it's all the time, we are on overload and then we collapse. If a student is doing this all the time, then we want to encourage and facilitate the other things. Say, just go to class and sit there. You don't have to do anything. Don't listen. Don't take notes. Nothing. Just sit in the class. Okay. Listen to a shiur. You have your whatever. If they listen to something on something, okay, here's your thing that you can listen to. You have a class you're listening to. I want you to sit down and listen to this for 1 hour. You don't pay attention. You don't think about anything, but sit and do this. You're going on a walk with your friend. The two of you are going on a walk. You come back in 20 minutes. See ya. So it's facilitating things that are other than the sitting in the emotion, because we can't sit in the emotion all the time. At the same time, we do need to sit in the emotion. So if there are students who are avoiding experiencing their emotions, I don't want to think about it, I'll pretend like it never happened, I've heard this question also, then no, we do want to facilitate experiencing the emotion. Also, very likely that would be possibly more helpful to do with a therapist, if that's a possibility. If they can get a therapy appointment, that is something that could be helpfully facilitated by a therapist. But you can also facilitate it by saying, how are you feeling today? Just if you're blocking off 20 minutes, 30 minutes to sit with this student, then you can have the flexibility to sit in this with them and facilitate this. And all you're doing is just facilitating them, not avoiding their emotion, and allowing them to experience it. Now they might tell you, no, I'm feeling fine. I'm not experiencing anything. Everything's good. And then I would push a little bit. If you see you're not getting anywhere, that's a red flag to me. So if I'm sitting with a student and they are saying, nope, everything's fine, and there's very strong reason to believe that everything is not fine. If everything's really fine, you don't have to drive anybody crazy. But if there's reason to believe that everything's not fine, and they're saying everything's fine, then there's probably this level of avoidance, which is likely going to come back to bite us in a couple months. So in order to avoid that, we do want to facilitate experiencing their emotions. And so if either you or a therapist can do that, or their family, doesn't have to be on you, but some way of facilitating experiencing emotion would be extremely important. And this is really true healthy grieving. I know there's a lot of conversation around stages of grief. That's not really, yes, we experience different experiences and emotions and whatever in relation to a massive tragedy. And there's the true healthy grieving involves experiencing emotions, expressing emotions, soothing yourself in your emotions, getting validation for your emotions, and moving on and doing other things, engaging in other things. What can you do? You can validate the validity of their thoughts and emotions. So I do want to differentiate here. Emotions and thoughts are different, and it's really important to understand the difference. Emotions are, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel guilty, I feel embarrassed. Emotions are one word, and that's it. That's, I can say emotions. And emotions are what they are. I can feel angry, and that is totally valid. I can feel whatever I want to feel, and it's all totally valid. Different from behavior. I can feel angry, totally valid. I can be so angry at you for doing that thing that I just need to hit you. Nope, that's not valid. Nope, that's invalid, in fact. Um, um, Thoughts, I can have the thought that this is totally crazy. How could this possibly happen? Hashem can't let this happen. It's totally valid that I'm having that thought. It makes perfect sense that I'm having that thought. The thought is not valid. You know the difference? So the thought is not necessarily valid, but having the thought is valid. So you can validate in your students, of course, you're thinking that, and allow any questions, any thoughts, they are all allowable, is super, super valuable. So allowing all emotions, allowing all thoughts, and then also you can at some point then direct to, like, why is it that Hashem could allow something to happen? And if you can answer that for them, wonderful. And if you're not able to answer that for them, then say, let's figure this out together and move them towards where they could get that question answered. Helping them attune to other emotions. So we talked about this already. You can help them to attune to their own emotions, but then also help them attune to other emotions by facilitating going on a walk with their friends, or reading a sefer, or whatever, calling a family member. Also, modeling appropriate expression and regulation of your own emotions is super valuable. So I think that this is complicated. It's complicated for parents, but I think it's, doubly complicated for people in chinuch. But it is valuable to somehow share that you have emotions and to model some version of an expression of that emotion and some version of regulating that emotion. So yeah, I have feelings about this. Of course I do. And this is how I'm taking care of that. This is how I'm dealing with that. Some version of that can be really valuable just in modeling appropriate behavior to your students, because if you have no emotions and they're flooded with all these emotions, then really the grown-up adult appropriate good response is to not have emotions, and we don't want to do that. That would not be healthy or appropriate at all. What should you not do? Don't make everyone get therapy, especially not trauma therapy. They don't need trauma therapy right now. I think I have another slide explaining why. But who should go? So anybody who's having a hard time facilitating healthy healing, that's the people who should go for therapy now, in my opinion, or people with a prior issue that has not been addressed, and then just now it's just coming to light. Great time to facilitate therapy. Anybody who is struggling to the point of not being able to engage in healthy recovery. So when there is a crisis or a tragedy like this, there's healthy recovery from that tragedy, which is what we've been talking about until now. And anybody who's not having that healthy recovery, like if they're engaging in avoidance, so they won't talk about it, they won't go near the building, they won't say certain things, they won't sleep in the dark, whatever. That's avoidance, and that's likely going to lead to bigger problems in a month or two from now. So it would be great to be able to work with somebody who can help facilitate that. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but it does have to be somebody who can help facilitate not avoiding and experiencing emotions. If there's nobody who can do that besides a therapist, then yes, I would encourage therapy. If their mother is able to support them in doing that, then God bless. It doesn't have to be a therapist. Yeah, and the other category of people who should go are people who had a prior need, and this is just now bringing it more to light. Do not promote avoidance versus appropriate distraction. If a girl, first of all, if it's late at night, we want to distract enough to get to sleep, because sleep is really, really valuable, especially for teenage girls, especially in the wake of what's going on. So if we can facilitate going to sleep by distraction and not talking about this now, great, let's do that. If a girl is in such high crisis that she's hysterical, laying on the floor, screaming, not talking, really, really losing it, then we can use distraction or other crisis skills that I'll teach you to help move her out of that. But that's not generally what we want to do. Generally, we want to support non-avoidance. We want to support, yes, talking about it, yes, feeling your feelings, even if the feelings are big and scary and overwhelming, just not if they're taking us to a place of hysteria or danger or whatever. Not that hysteria is danger. If a girl is totally losing it on the floor screaming, I have no reason to believe that she's in danger. Just that's really important. And I don't need to make that behavior stop. I just want to facilitate that stopping because, probably she's, it's probably not super pleasant. But I'm not worried about her. I just want to facilitate her to, be able to pick herself up and get herself to bed or to class or whatever is needed at that moment. I am nervous about this slide, but I thought it was important to address. Well, I think that this is what I'm hearing from the schools. And I think it's just important to put on the table. Because I think that schools are shocked, and I'm telling you, I've heard this from at least 4 or 5 schools in the last few days, let alone what I've heard from schools in the last several years. I've heard this repeated several times, because I am a therapist. I have clients who come to seminary every year, and sometimes we talk to the seminaries, and sometimes we don't. And we don't necessarily have permission to talk to we don't have permission usually to talk to the seminaries, even if we disagree. So unless there is an actual acute danger, which there's typically not an acute danger, we're not going to be able to say anything. And that's not necessarily what we want. We may be making strong recommendations not to do that, but there's real valid reasons why parents don't trust you. So the reality is that most parents typically do not trust the schools with their daughter's mental health information. I do not agree with that. I don't think you should send your daughter to a foreign country really a teenager, into the hands of a place that you don't trust with their mental health information. And I see this, for the record, from subclinical issues. So minorly anxious, minorly depressed, but not in a way that I'm massively concerned about the student at all the way to really serious issues where I'm really, really concerned. But across the board, parents seem to not trust the schools with this information. And I also see this from the most difficult parents with real issues to the most attentive, down to earth, normal parents. And I think that what I've seen is that there's an assumption on the part of the school that if the parents are normal, then they'll tell the school. And if the parents have issues, then they would hide it. But that's not necessarily true at all. And I'm telling you that as a fact of somebody who's sending girls to Arts Israel every year for seminary. I see that repeatedly. I think the reasons for this are they're afraid of being rejected from the school, even once they're in the school. They feel a little bit safer once they're in. So sometimes they'll say it like once the girl actually gets here, which of course is always super fun. So that's a big fear, is that they're going to be rejected. They're afraid, even once they're here, they're afraid that they're going to be treated differently because of this issue. And even if it's a minor anxiety and they're just in therapy to treat some anxiety, which is like probably majority of the girls, even so, we're still afraid to say anything. And they're also afraid for shidduchim. And I think all 3 of those reasons are valid, and we have to acknowledge that. And if there's anything that you can do to make any of these reasons invalid, please do it. Please reassure them that you're a partner and not an enemy on this, if there's any way that you can think of doing that. Rather than assuming that the parents should say something, because I in my opinion, they shouldn't. I totally hear why they don't. Sometimes I totally disagree, and I will tell them, I completely think you're crazy for doing this. That doesn't mean that they listen to me, and I can't control that. Should they all go to trauma therapy? Nope. No, they shouldn't. All reactions in the wake of, so I don't like to call this a trauma. This is what we call an acute stressor, or a crisis or a tragedy or a disaster. All reactions are normal in the wake of a disaster, and most people will not develop mental health issues as a result of experiencing a massive disaster, crisis, trauma, whatever you want to call it. Normal recovery happens for most people. The general statistic is about 70% of people recover and about 30% of people end up with a mental health issue, but this actually can be further divided based on the type of disaster, whether it's an ongoing issue. So for example, what happened on Simchas Torah is kind of ongoing, not totally ongoing, but in a way it's ongoing. We're still in a war. Versus something that happens once and then it's over, and then there's more space for recovery. It's different if it's interpersonal. So a hurricane is much easier to recover from than a terror attack. But in general, so aside from specifics, in general, most people recovered. That is able to happen. And it happens when we're able to fit our experience into our world. Like when we're able to make sense of this happened within my world, then I can kind of synthesize that and I can move forward. You can help them do that by all the things we mentioned until now, by facilitating, sticking with the facts, experiencing emotions, getting a validating reaction to their emotions, and then being able to move on to other things, not facilitating avoidance, and then dealing with the hysteria. So I'll give you a couple, you know what? I'm mindful of the time, and I think I've talked about this in other talks. So hopefully you've heard me in other talks, and I think we explain it in handouts that we have on our website. So I'll skip the crisis survival skills, but if somebody put that in the chat, if somebody does want me to go into specifics, I'm happy to do so and just mention it in the chat. Should they leave? No. Obviously, if there's a specific reason for a specific girl, I'm not accounting for that. Ask a Shyla, don't ask me. That's also fine. But in a general mental health perspective, no, they shouldn't leave. Just because something massive happened is not a reason to end their, very transformative, hopefully, seminary year. We don't want to validate the invalid. Invalid is avoidance and not sitting with big things, and we don't want to validate that. We don't accommodate dysfunctional behavior. We don't support doing things that are not healthy and engaging. So I support engaging with the difficulty of this, even though it's massively difficult, but I don't see any logical reason why anybody should be leaving, unless there's a specific nuance that I'm not picking up on. But definitely put it in, ask me about it if I'm missing something. Dealing with big questions. They will have big questions. If they're not voicing the big questions, I'm more concerned because then it's in their head and they're sitting with it. I would rather them say the big questions. Making big questions allowable is a huge deal in terms of that process of making sense of this huge thing in their world, like allowing this all to synthesize that this could happen in my world without me needing to completely fall apart, or without me needing to not be able to handle it. Like I can exist in the world with this big thing happening. That happens if I'm allowing for big questions to exist, not necessarily that I'm going to understand perfectly all the answers to all of them, but that I'm able to voice them and move through them. If you don't know, say I don't know. Let's find out. Okay, questions, thoughts, hopes, dreams, wishes, aspirations, unresolved inner conflicts. So I'm gonna look in the chat box. I think mechanchos need a similar workshop right now. Possible, definitely possible. If you can email us at the email that's on here, info@thecbtdbtcenter.com, and ask more specifically with any details that are relevant, and happy to talk about it. Is confused a thought or a feeling? It's probably a thought. It's probably a thought. What do they mean by confused? That's how I'll usually ask. So they might say, I mean by confused is I just feel so many feelings at once. That's really like overwhelmed. I feel a lot of feelings at once and it's intense. But what they might mean by confused is, how could this happen to somebody just like me? So then that's a thought. So I would clarify what they mean by that. Is it okay to avoid the building temporarily till the feelings calm down? Temporarily, but it has to be very temporarily. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. So I would actually really encourage facilitating going near the building, going on the block of the building, going inside the lobby of the building, just like steps. It doesn't have to be the full thing all at once, but facilitating steps towards normal behavior. I've heard people encouraging not such normal things, and I'm not supportive of that. But I am supportive of normal. Go to the classroom, go to the floor of the building. Like those are all reasonable things, and you want to only facilitate that. It doesn't have to be right now. It doesn't have to be all the way. But the longer you wait, the harder it gets, because the more you teach your brain that this is a thing that I can handle. We want to teach our brain is that I can handle this. This can exist in my world. I can go inside this building where this big crazy thing happened. Okay. So I'm saying that so many things are super treatable, and I have seen so many cases that did not make notable progress, either at all or for a very long time. Could it be we need many clones of Dr. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just amazing. And her team to get these girls effective treatment. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's just about effective treatment. And I think that's why I would love to one day when we're not in a crisis give a talk on what really acceptable treatment should include. But I will just say here and now some important variables. There should be an assessment. These are things you should basically expect from any treatment provider, whatever treatment they are providing. I don't care if it's narrative, 3D, journey, whatever therapy they're providing. This should be happening, nikuda, end of the story. There should be assessment. Like I should be able to look at the person as a whole, not just whatever they happen to talk about today. No, I should be able to look at the person as a whole and make an assessment of what is happening right now. I should have a clue of what's happening with the person as a whole. Okay, it's unfair to say whatever they bring up is what I deal with. That's unfair. It's not taking responsibility. So there should be assessment. There should be a treatment plan. So it doesn't have to particularly include any one modality, but there does have to be a treatment plan. There has to be assessment of progress. That's it. And anybody who only provides one mode of therapy is going to, it's just in my opinion, it's going to have to be ineffective. There's no way that one mode of therapy is going to apply to all people. Different people have different things and need different things. So that's why. So it's not necessarily about one particular provider. It's just about making sure that we're actually getting effective treatment. So I think that as mechanchim, you probably face so many barriers just in even getting girls to go to therapy that it's probably hard to then do the follow-up of making sure that that therapy is effective. But I would have a conversation when you're encouraging therapy that therapy has to work for you. If it's not working for you, then we need to have a conversation about that. So I would give it 2 months, 3 months, and then say, how is it going? Are things different? Are things better? And if they're not, why not? What's happening? And we need to understand that and be dealing with that. It's not something, we can't just let this go. That's not acceptable, in my opinion. Okay, when a girl admits she's self-harming, how seriously should we take that? Okay, that's a good question, but let me understand what you mean by that. How probable is it that this will lead to suicidal thoughts? Okay, just to answer right away, not necessarily. Self-harm and suicide are two different things. However, self-harm is a very significant risk factor for suicide because one of the major preventions for suicide is inhibition. It's a very big leap to kill myself. Like it's a huge thing to do. From what we generally do moment by moment by moment is engage in very strong efforts in self-preservation, right? We breathe without thinking about it, right? So we are always trying to preserve our existence. If we see something coming out of the corner of our eye, we immediately move. That's an automatic reaction. So in order to move from that regular basic self-preservation mode all the way to killing yourself, that's a very big leap in terms of my inhibition around harming my body. If somebody is engaging in regular self-harm, not that they did it one time, but if there's somebody who's engaging in regular self-harm, that is a red flag only in terms of that the inhibition is lower. But that said, that doesn't mean that they are automatically, a concern. They're concerned just like somebody who's expressing passive suicidal ideation is a concern. So yeah, there's concern and they should get treatment for that. But I wouldn't be worrying all the way to maybe they're going to kill themselves tomorrow. I wouldn't run to that. And by the way, so that's why as a therapist, if there's self-harm, I'm addressing it first, not addressing the teacher that you don't like and should I stay in seminary and my mom is horrible. I'm not addressing any of that until I'm addressing the self-harm first, because that is my highest priority. But that doesn't mean that I'm concerned that they're going to die this week. We don't have the tools as a seminary to deal with prevention and keep a girl safe. Of course not. Even families with just their own children don't usually have the means to make somebody safe, which is why we have to do certain things that we can do, but not everything. We can't control people, and we have to sit with that as well. We have to sit with that we can't control people. Like that's a huge thing to sit with. So I'm going to compare this to hospitalization. Sometimes I choose to require or recommend hospitalization. Very, very rarely. Very rarely. It's not usually a great idea. Why? So hospitals are good for two reasons. I'm explaining this in terms, I'm trying to answer the question of should they be at home. But I'm just using the hospital as an example of a safer place. So to own, I work with people who are suicidal pretty much every day. And I have seen one completed suicide, and it was and it was prior to this, and it was on it was in a hospital unit. It was in a hospital. Okay. Not even in somebody's home. It was in a hospital. Okay. Um, so just to explain like how if somebody wants to die, they will die. And we can't necessarily make that not happen. Okay. When do we hospitalize? Two reasons. Or sorry. When is hospital helpful? Two reasons. Either there is no other way that I can keep this person alive, or I need a significant medication change for a massive, like either like psychotic episode or really, really significant issues in medication. And I have no other safe way of going about it. Those are the two reasons I would recommend hospitalization. It's not going to treat anything. It's not going to make anything better. It's not going to solve any problems. So same thing with going home. Going home is not going to treat any problems necessarily. It's not going to make anything any better. And it's not even necessarily going to keep them safe. It just might be more eyes on them, whatever. So if you are really concerned that somebody might die in seminary, and you have to have real reason to believe that they might die, but why do you believe that they might die in seminary? But if you really believe that they might die in seminary, yeah, having more eyes on them more of the time might be helpful, just like a hospital might be like a step up from the home. So that would be a reason. But let's be honest, how really convinced are you that they're not safe in your seminary and they really might die? That, that's a pretty big jump. So yeah, I would really be consulting carefully about that. Um, does she have to force herself if there's no one there that she knows? Not necessarily. Again, I'm very into like be normal, stick with the facts. There's no reason that this person has to go to the building. But if I am particularly avoiding the building because of this of my emotional reaction, then going in the building, sitting in the lobby might just bring down help me to kind of synthesize this information. So that's why I would encourage something like that. It doesn't have to be today, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but just even passing by the building, just walking by it outside, might be helpful. Okay, this is really tough question. How do you balance the school's encouragement of talking about this for Covenant Mace to encouraging open conversation? So this is a hard balance because on the one hand, we must have Covenant Mace, and we have to facilitate our students and ourselves, and so many people who are responding and reacting to healthy responding. And so what I think is most important in terms of that is sticking with the facts. For example, I think that the fact that she was found by some girls means that we cannot pretend that this wasn't a suicide. We can't pretend that. That's unfair to those girls, and that's unfair to anybody in their circle who would know these facts, and it makes it unallowable and unacceptable. So we have to deal with facts. We actually, I think it's completely disrespectful and inappropriate to deal with speculation, or curiosity is totally inappropriate. We can validate that it's normal that one might feel curious, like that might show up. It's normal, but it's completely inappropriate and disrespectful, and we're not supporting or facilitating that. But we are facilitating dealing with real facts. So the real fact is this is what happened, and we have to deal with that. I hope that answered that, but if it didn't, please, ask more. Um, okay. Sorry, I don't see a question. Somebody sent me something directly, but I don't see a question in there. Yeah, it's much easier now, and I actually think that that's a really, hopefully, a really big. I don't know if nechama or actually properly uh potentially an aliyah for the neshama that really actually really facilitated right now, that it's very easy to go to therapy right now. There's hopefully no barriers, hopefully really no barriers. It's not insulting, it's totally on the table, we are supportive, right? So hopefully that's actually a wonderful thing. um okay, I have many Toronto girls calling very worried how they shouldn't if they should be worried about their daughter. um Yeah. So I think should they be worried? Um, Yeah. Um, um, Even for girl, it doesn't matter if the girl was her roommate, super close with her, grew up on the same block as her, or said she was her best friend, which something I heard many times, which I think is only a wonderful thing, that so many girls felt so close to her. This is huge, and we have to sit with it. This is huge, and allow for all the hugeness. They can have all the huge emotions. That cannot be dangerous. We cannot say that having big emotions is dangerous, because then what? So we have to allow for the healthy processing of this, which is going to require big emotions and big responses. And we have to sit and tolerate that, including the mothers. And the more the mothers freak out, the more the daughters will freak out and not allow for those experiences, because they are unallowable. And then then we're not in a great situation. So I think what to encourage the Toronto mothers to do is to continue to have open conversation, allow for all emotions. Don't freak out and run to call whoever every time your daughter has a big emotion, because that doesn't make it allowable. Allow for big questions, allow for big thoughts, allow it all, and sit with it, and don't make it a bad thing, and don't make it a problem, and just continue facilitating it. And then that makes everything on the table. And as long as everything's on the table, we should be in a good situation. If a girl is really not managing, and by that I mean not sleeping, not eating, not going to class, then yeah, we probably want to get immediate therapy, not because they need treatment, but because they probably need somebody who can specifically focus with the girl on getting towards healthy functioning right now. If a non-therapist, like a family member or a school person, sorry, for that very elegant term, can facilitate that, fantastic. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but somebody has to be focused and on the job of facilitating healthy responding. Somebody has to be responsible for that. And if they're really not managing, then they really need a manager of that. And it could be the mother, if the mother can handle it. Mother cannot handle it, or she can't really assess from afar because her daughter is not so expressive or whatever, then it has to be somebody on the ground, or somebody has to be in charge of facilitating that. So that's what I would make sure. Um, okay, what to say to a girl? This is a very common question. What to say to a girl who is scared that, how do I know I won't come to this if a girl like me did? I also have issues. So this is like the up there in the top questions. First of all, I'm very confident we answered this in the handouts that we put together for seminary students. I really encourage, I mean, obviously I'm totally biased, so approve it yourselves. But we put together a few handouts, including answers to questions on our website. It's the website's there on the screen, the cbtdvtcenter.com/store has a bunch of free resources, and one of them is called Dear Sem Student. I think we put together one for mechanchim and mechanchos as well. So hopefully that can be helpful. And we put in common questions that we're getting from mechanchim/mechanchos. So hopefully that's helpful. But those questions are that a question is addressed in there. So the basic answer is it's not something that just happens, right? You don't just wake up one day and like all of a sudden, because I think the fear is, I don't want to die. And this happened to a girl just like me. How do I know that that's not going to just happen to me? So it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. And if you are struggling, deal with that. Don't let yourself just be struggling. Let this be a massive lesson in not allowing us to sit, to allow for mental health problems to sit. Okay, we don't want to allow that. But beyond not sitting and allowing problems, you can have problems. That doesn't mean you're going to die. If you are thinking about killing yourself, then yes, discuss that with somebody and work on that with somebody. If you're not actively working on that and you are having suicidality, yeah, then I'd be concerned. Okay, that's where I will say, there's my concern. Okay, but for most girls who get anxious, who get depressed, I don't think you're going to wake up tomorrow and kill yourself, but call me crazy, or scared for her friend who isn't so stable, but the school is aware and it doesn't seem like an immediate danger. What are the right reassuring messages? Okay, we never need to provide reassurance. Reassurance is not necessary. You don't need to reassure her. You do need to let her sit in that worry. Like she can, you can sit in the reality that this could happen. That's what actually has to happen for healthy recovery from this, is sitting in that this could happen. And I have to sit with that. And if I don't sit with that, then I will have long-term post-trauma symptoms. Yes, correct. That is how that happens. The way that we facilitate having post-trauma long-term problems is by not allowing the thing that happened to have happened, because it happened and we have to sit in the fact that it happened. So scared for her friend. So if you're scared for your friend, so talk to her. Tell her, Sorry, I thought that was a siren. Aren't we all doing that right now? Um, if the friend is dealing with it and the friend and the school is aware, then yeah, sit with that. This could happen and say to your friend, hey, I worry about you. Can you let me know that you're okay? It doesn't have to be obsessively, but you can check in and you can say, I'm thinking about you today. How are you doing today? That's a wonderful thing to do. Okay, what about the schools that are still presenting it as if it wasn't a suicide, even though many of their students know? We may not be able to change the school's mahalach, but we need to know what to say to a girl who complains about how they feel about that. I would totally validate the student. Obviously, each school is going to decide what's best for their school, and I'm not going to say that any mahalach is wrong. I will just say what I don't think is psychologically healthy. It is not psychologically healthy to deny reality. And when you do that, especially with teenagers, you are making it unacceptable and unallowable, which again is the way that we facilitate post trauma problems happening. So if you want to facilitate post trauma problems happening, deny reality. Don't allow reality to be acceptable. So what I would say to that student is, you know the facts. The fact that the school is not owning that hurts. But let's assume that what they're doing, it can be painful, but you can still deal with it. You can still deal with what you have to deal with. Okay. I hope I addressed somebody sent me, sorry that the question came out cut off. I hope I addressed it. Yeah. Okay. The therapy piece or needing help or admitting needing help is a contradiction to the perfect picture that many of the girls in the Ivy League seminaries feel so pressured to convey. How do we break the need to be perfect that is their inner drive? So I love that question so much. Like, let this be our opportunity to break that perfect does not, or that wonderful does not mean having no emotions, having no challenges, not struggling. Actually, frankly, then you'd be dead. Okay. Because dead people don't need to work on themselves. Alive people need to work on themselves. So if you're still alive, you've got plenty to work on. So that and hopefully another really important way of facilitating that is by modeling your own fallibility, modeling that you experience not just fallibility, but also modeling that you experience emotions and that you manage those emotions, that you not that you don't have emotions. So supporting that can be like the most important way of doing that. But I think also sitting with that that other question of, could this just happen to me? It's not going to just suddenly happen to you, but that also because how do we know it's not going to just suddenly happen to you? Because only if you're dealing with the things that you need to deal with. So needing to not go to therapy in order to present a certain image makes no sense then. Hopefully that's like a very like logical contradiction if I need to deal with the things I need to deal with in order to be safe and healthy. Just like going to a well visit at the doctor, you know? Yeah, not needing to reassure. That's a big thing. Um, Yeah. Unfortunately for some girls, this is not their first exposure to suicide of someone they know. I know I'm also hearing that. Um, and the girls are struggling now with feeling the world we live in is so unstable with so much mental illness. Um, given the fact that some of them also have a family member with mental illness, how do we help them feel this world is not as dark as they see it? How do we help them feel more stability, especially when all this is happening with the war in the background? Yeah, you may not be able to facilitate so much stability. Stability you can provide in terms of redirecting them to sleep, eat, go to class, talk to your family, hang out with your friends, like do basic normal things. That's how you can facilitate stability. But the fact that big things are happening in their world is really just something you continue to validate. Wow, I did not grow up with this stuff. That is huge. When I went to seminary, this is not what I was dealing with. And I am so sorry. And that is a big deal. That doesn't mean that the world is dark, or that everything, that only bad things are going to happen. I think we can validate that this is also very logically Chavlei Mashiach, like this is very intense times. That is real, and adults are feeling that. So of course you're feeling that. I mean, their whole high school experience was characterized by Corona. This is not they're not growing up in a normal situation. So I think just validating that and sitting with them in that kind of can facilitate that kind of a processing thing that we're looking to process, allow them to accurately express, validate, and then allow them to move with it. right? Be in your regular life together with the fact that big things are happening, so that they can process that this is the world they have to exist in. Okay, if they have a suicidal parent or sibling and or suicidal tendencies themselves from high school, the world does seem very dark to them. They are seeing much more pain than health. Um, I think you can probably help facilitate connecting them with like, can they go volunteer somewhere where they can see how much Kali Israel is coming together and doing wonderful things? Like, can they take on going to the Kosel once a week or something where they can see how many people go and are davening and are good people? Can they go to wonderful Shabbos experiences where they're going to see healthy, normal families? Like, those are just kind of like facilitating normal engagement will be valuable, but that is big to sit with. So I think there's the two-sided thing of allow them to sit in the difficulty and validate that while also facilitating normal. Like, we want to facilitate normal, but we want to allow for the difficult. Um, Girls are struggling with the question of working on taking responsibility for their actions and choices as opposed to forgiving themselves and realizing their struggles are valid. That is really big. And I think you can support how big that is and how adults work on that also. And both are important. We have to forgive ourselves from, and I think this also gets into the function, the importance of, and I said this to the girls the first morning, how you need to acknowledge mistakes of the past, because we are all going to consistently continue to make mistakes as long as we're alive, while also using that information to move forward. So taking responsibility means I recognize that I did something that wasn't great. Wonderful. Guess what Tshuva tells us to do? Tshuva tells us to be aware of the mistake, regret the mistake, stop making the mistake, and make a plan for how to do something different in the future. Wonderful. So you're aware that you didn't do something great. Good. Great. That's a great position to be in. How are you going to make that different in the future? Like, regret or sitting and hating yourself for the past has no place here. Okay. I have reached the end of the chat box. Is there anything that I did not address? I will give 2 minutes. You can feel free to add anything else in here. Yeah, you're welcome. The recording of this, Bezrat Hashem, will soon, let's say within the next day, be up on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and you search CBT DBT Center, it will come up. If you don't have YouTube, we will also be sending out the Drive link, but I don't have like a email listing of all the seminaries. So you might have to reach out to us to get that link. I find that the greatest challenge is really perfectionism for many of my students. Any tips? I think there's two main things with that. Yeah, tell them to stop it. Yeah, that usually works. Sometimes that works. No, not usually. So two things. First of all, model your fallibility. Say out loud, oh, I forgot to make my photocopies for my class today. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay. And move with it. Like, allow for mistakes and talk about, yeah, and their mothers. You can't fix their mothers. But hopefully you can model healthier living. So model fallibility and also talk about fallibility, like talk about how it's healthy and normal that we are going to not do everything right all the time. And we have to be comfortable sitting with that, because otherwise we're going to have a very hard time navigating life. So both those things. It's like it's in how you live, like live with mistakes, like model making mistakes, and then also talk about making mistakes. I'll give another minute if any other questions are coming up. The schools are demanding perfectionism in many ways. Any day you miss affects your credits. Then college, we're not helping the situation. So this goes back to my slide that I was nervous about of why parents don't trust you. Facilitate them trusting you, facilitate their fallibility, facilitate it. Listen, if you don't do your assignment, you are going to get a lower grade. That can happen, but it can also be okay to get a lower grade. Can it be okay to get a lower grade? I mean, I'm not saying, yay, we all want to get low grades. I'm saying, can it be okay with getting a lower grade? I remember that was a really big problem for me in seminary because I was very clear with myself that I had no interest in getting good grades in seminary because that's not why I was going. And I was very clear about that, but the school was not very clear about that. And they were very upset that I wasn't trying to get better grades than I was getting. But I wish more students would have that perspective. I think that why are they here? And can it be okay to get lower grades? And even if it's going to affect college, that's true. But I can also make mistakes and have lower grades and instead have had a great time with my friends and learn something really important. And that can be okay too. So are we supportive? Are we tolerant of getting lower grades or of not getting it perfect every time? Yeah. Yeah. If I can't get the video, is there an audio recording? Oh, I'd like to hear the beginning that I missed and pass on to others. I didn't, Zoom downloads an audio also. I didn't think of that, but I can share the audio just as much. If you can't get the YouTube and you can't email our office and we'll send you the link. I will try sending out the link wherever I usually send things, but I don't have like a direct access email to people. So better best if you email us and request it. Um, if communal pressure, it's communal pressured perfectionism or looking the same, living beyond means a great girl from a great family. I only came to SEM to put cherry on perfect cupcake. I think you can own that. You are all in chinuch. You have a very strong platform by which to say that this is ridiculous. This is not possible. This is not, I don't think this is any connection with what Hashem wants from us as Ovdei Hashem. I just don't think it's related to what Hashem wants from us, but I could be wrong. I think you have a good platform for arguing for that. Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say Halavai also, but where's Hashem? Um, okay. On that note, I hope this was helpful. Oh, okay. Somebody wants to clarify an earlier question. Is there anything else we should be looking for as an alert that a girl is not coping well besides for her either avoiding or not being herself? I think to me, the biggest red flag is if they're not talking. If they're as long as they're talking, I'm kind of okay with anything right now. Anything is really on the table. Other than saying I'm going to kill myself, anything, pretty much anything else is totally normal and not concerning. As long as we're facilitating that being allowable, not avoiding from it, uh, you know, doing good stuff. And managing the shock aspects. If girls joke about suicide, is that just an immature way to cope? Yep, that is. I would say I would definitely tell them that that's completely inappropriate and you're not supportive and you absolutely are not supportive and don't tolerate this. But in the back of your head, you can also just hold like, okay, roll your eyes and hopefully, yeah, about themselves doing it. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. It's disgusting. But they're also 17, 18, 19-year-old girls. Like, so I wouldn't read into it. I wouldn't make it mean anything, but I also wouldn't stand for it either. How about a girl who says she didn't know the girl and is really fine, not feeling anything? Is she in denial um and needs to get it out, or just let her be? Listen, not if a girl didn't know her and doesn't really have shaykhs to this. I still think every seminary girl probably has some reaction, and that's probably normal and healthy to have some reaction. And even if she's saying she's not feeling anything, then I would let her be to an extent. I would let her be as long as it seems like she's regularly functioning and coping. But if it seems like she's avoiding and that there is something that she's feeling, that's more my concern. It's not a concern if somebody doesn't feel anything. It's a concern if somebody does feel something and they're not expressing it, then it's stuck. So there's probably some reaction, and I would just try to facilitate that reaction coming out somewhere like, hey, I just know this big thing is going on. Checking in. That's all you can do. Okay. Well, I'm glad we were able to hold this space and, oh, sorry, one more. The Toronto girls started saying about everything, hashtag I lost my friend. Is that something I should stop? I feel like on their level, it's black humor, relief after days of crying and being in so much pain, and they're starting to get back into their life. It took me so many years to understand what that like hashtag this meant. But now I understand what that means. I actually think that doesn't sound to me like black humor. It sounds to me like they're owning I lost my friend. I think I actually told them to do that, not the hashtag part, but but to say the fact, I lost my friend. I want to XYZ. I don't want XYZ. I don't want to talk about this right now. I really want to have some space right now. I want to talk to you in an hour. Can we talk? I told the Toronto girls to say that, to own the fact. The fact is they lost their friend. Own it. Deal with it. Be in it. So the fact they've made it a hashtag, I think, is just adding a little like a community around it, or a communal language. Sorry, a communal language, which I think is actually fantastic. I'm very supportive. I don't think it's even Black humor at all. I think it's a communal language and a way for them to own where they're at and be in their experience. So I'm supportive. Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm really doing a great job. So I want this to be open. So I'm going to continue just saying I have another minute until we wrap it up. So it's okay to keep sending questions. Don't worry about it. Is this something to be avoided in the classroom? Totally. I think it depends on what kind of class you run and your relationship with the girls, but I definitely don't think it's something to be avoided totally. I think the classroom is a fantastic platform to address big questions and things that are probably on their minds that they might not be owning or might not have a space to address. They are so fortunate to be able to have access to people who actually can address big questions. So use your classroom to address big questions. That's what I would facilitate. I would not facilitate the healthy emotion expression part, because I wouldn't want to facilitate in in a classroom setting. That might be like just not healthy or appropriate or comfortable. Like if, for example, if I'm feeling this in a very big way and my friends are not, and my teacher's trying to facilitate me feeling that, I might be really uncomfortable. So I would just use the classroom space to facilitate discussion of big questions, not to facilitate healthy emotion expression. That difference there. Giving messages that we can cope with difficulty is a good thing to stick in also. Absolutely. Yep. Some schools said no, only after class. So I am not going to disagree with any school policy. I'm going to just share psychological wellness tips. So that's my my hashtag. Yeah, I think you can also still, even if school said not to talk about it, you can still talk about the questions that you are clear girls are having. You can still deal with those questions. Um, yeah, I think I agree that I think that it's really important to, yes, talk about difficult things, even if you're not addressing, even if you don't say, hey, like this happened last week, let's talk about it. If you just address the big question aspect of it, you're doing a big favor to the girls who are not saying it out loud, but have it in their heads. Um, Is it okay if they're asking big questions as a group when many of the questions that come up were not questions for other girls and now they're thinking about it? I think that's fun. That's totally okay. They're gonna, that's normal. Like that's gonna happen. They're gonna talk. So even if one girl wasn't thinking about that question and now she is, okay, great. But let's deal with the answer. Judaism is very good with having many answers. We're not going to have an answer for everything, but we can have an answer for many things, and that is very helpful. So facilitate that. Even if you don't know the answer, facilitate them getting to somebody who would know the answer. Say, I'm going to find this out. We are going to figure this out together. And it's normal that they're going to do it as a group. Like that's normal. We're social creatures and we heal socially also. What to tell an 11-year-old? My daughter came home from school with it. Wow. Yeesh. I think the best thing you can do is own it. You have to own the facts that we have to deal with. If an 11-year-old doesn't know about it, you don't have to bring it up. But if an 11-year-old does know about it, oh, you definitely have to bring it up and you definitely have to deal with it, because you don't want her in 1 year from now sitting with the thought, oh my gosh, I'm so upset. I want to just not exist. Oh my God, I'm suicidal. I'm going to die. And then planning whatever. You don't want that happening, right? So let's just own it now and make it totally acceptable to talk about, because then they talk to you and not to anybody else and not to no one. So I would very much put it on the table on their level. Okay. I hope this was helpful, and I'm glad that we had this space. And Ba'atzlacha, you're doing incredible work. Have a good night.